Hi, I'm Emily. I'll be your storyteller today. Many of you use these stories to fall asleep. So before we begin, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. Also, where are you watching from, and what time is it there? Now get comfortable. Close your eyes and let the sound of the rain guide you into the story. The first droplets hit the windshield as darkness began to drape the lonely road ahead. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel, leaning slightly forward, eyes squinting through the rapidly fogging glass. The rhythmic pattering of rain became a gentle lullaby, soothing, yet unsettling. A faint glow appeared in the distance, soft lights flickering between thick curtains of rain, promising warmth and shelter. Little did I know this glow marked the entrance to a village I'd never find on any map. The signpost emerged abruptly from the shadows, weathered wood barely legible. Welcome to Eldermire. Strange, I thought. I'd traveled this route countless times and never heard of this place. Curiosity tingled along my spine, pushing caution aside. Slowing the car. To a crawl, I passed rows of silent cottages, their windows illuminated by candles whose flames barely stirred. The smell of damp earth mingled with something else, something ancient and faintly metallic, drifting through my cracked window. I parked near what seemed to be the village square, my headlights illuminating cobblestone streets glistening from the rain. Turning off the ignition, silence enveloped me, heavier now, almost tangible. No human sounds, no distant murmurs, only the steady drumming of rain and the low rumble of distant thunder. A sudden movement caught my eye, a shadow shifting briefly behind one of the windows, vanishing as swiftly as it had appeared, leaving only ripples of uncertainty. Stepping from the warmth of the car, my boots splashed gently into shallow puddles, forming between the uneven stones. Rain slid down my jacket, cold fingers tracing paths along my skin. The village square felt oddly empty, yet intensely watched. A nearby lamppost flickered weakly, illuminating a stone bench covered in moss, beside which lay a forgotten child's doll, soaked and dirty, smiling grotesquely up at the stormy sky. It felt oddly symbolic, innocence abandoned to the mercy of the elements. "Lost?" came a soft, raspy voice from behind, nearly drowned by the rain. I spun around, startled, heart racing to confront the source. A frail figure stood beneath a tattered umbrella. The elderly woman smiled faintly, eyes cloudy, yet piercing through the veil of rain. "Travelers rarely find Eldermire, except on nights like these," she murmured enigmatically, her voice a soothing whisper, laced with something unsettling. I hesitated, uncertain if her presence was comforting or deeply troubling. I cleared my throat, steadying my voice despite the uneasy feeling blooming in my chest. "I didn't see this village on the map," I admitted cautiously, watching droplets trace their way down her umbrella, each one catching the dim, flickering light. She tilted her head slightly, an almost playful curiosity dancing behind her aged eyes. "Few ever do," she replied softly, stepping forward, her footsteps oddly silent on the wet stones. "Perhaps the village only appears when it wants to." Before I could question her strange remark, she gestured gently toward a small inn tucked between shadowy buildings. A wooden sign hung above its entrance, creaking gently in the wind. The silent lantern. Something about the name sent chills through my veins. Yet the offer of shelter was undeniably inviting. "You'll find comfort there," she assured, her voice smooth and gentle, yet edged with quiet insistence. "And perhaps you'll find answers too." I glanced back toward my car, hesitant to stray farther from the security it represented. The rain intensified, urging me onward. Reluctantly, I followed the woman toward the inn. Our footsteps echoed softly, muffled yet persistent beneath the drumming of raindrops on rooftops and awnings. The door to the inn opened slowly as we approached, revealing a dimly lit room beyond, candles flickering gently atop wooden tables, casting long, wavering shadows across the rustic walls. Inside, The air felt thick with the scent of burning, firewood and herbs, oddly comforting despite its strangeness. At a small desk near the entrance, a man stood hunched over a ledger. He raised his head slowly, eyes dark beneath heavy brows, studying me silently before nodding in quiet greeting. "Welcome to Eldermire," he intoned softly, voice deep and gravelly, resonating with quiet authority. "Rooms are ready upstairs. Always ready." Before I could ask about rates or availability, he pushed a rusted brass key gently toward me across the worn counter. The number etched onto the key's surface, barely visible in the candlelight, was 13. My stomach tightened inexplicably as my fingers closed around it. Sensing my unease, the elderly woman placed a reassuring hand on my arm, her skin surprisingly warm. "Rest first," she whispered kindly, though her eyes betrayed something far deeper, more mysterious. The rain never lasts forever, but it always reveals what it must. The stairs creaked under my weight as I ascended slowly, the brass key clenched tightly in my damp palm. Each step seemed to echo louder than the last, as if the building itself were listening. The candlelit hallway above was narrow and lined with old portraits, faces faded, eyes hollow, watching in silent judgment. When I reached the door marked 13, the air grew inexplicably colder, and I felt a strange pressure in my ears, like I had crossed an unseen threshold. The key slid into the lock with a reluctant click. The door swung open with a soft groan, revealing a modest room with worn furnishings and a small fireplace already lit. The fire crackled quietly, its warmth a sharp contrast to the heavy atmosphere clinging to the space. Rain tapped steadily against the window pane, and outside only darkness was visible, no sign of the square, the street, or the inn's exterior, as though the world had vanished behind a curtain of water. I dropped my backpack beside the bed and sat down cautiously, eyes scanning every corner of the room. A faint ticking sound drew my attention to a small clock above the fireplace. It had no hands. Odd. I stood to inspect it, but just as my fingers reached toward the empty face, I heard it. 3 soft knocks on the door behind me. I turned sharply, heart pounding. "Hello?" I called, but silence answered. Cautiously, I crossed the room and opened the door. No one stood in the hallway, but something had changed. One of the paintings was missing. Where once hung the faded image of a young boy holding a lantern, there was now only an empty frame, swaying slightly as if it had just been disturbed. A chill raced down my spine. I closed the door and locked it this time, backing away slowly, toward the bed. Just as I turned, a gust of wind came from the fireplace, scattering ash across the wooden floor. I stared in disbelief as faint letters began to form in the soot, words appearing as though written by an invisible hand. "The village remembers." My breath caught in my throat. This was no ordinary place. Whatever Eldermire was, it wasn't just a village forgotten by maps. It was a memory that refused to die, a place that only the rain could reveal. I crouched down beside the message on the floor, hesitant to touch it, as though doing so might disturb whatever force had conjured it. The letters remained sharp and distinct, refusing to fade despite the warm air rising from the fire. My mind scrambled for logic. Maybe it was a trick of the ash, a coincidence. But I didn't believe it. Something wanted me to read that phrase. Something wanted me to remember, even if I didn't yet understand what. Outside, the storm deepened. Thunder rolled far off in the hills, low and steady like a drumbeat. The candle on the bedside table flickered violently before extinguishing, without warning, plunging half the room into shadow. I grabbed the matchbox and struck a flame, but it hissed out before I could relight the wick. Again and again I tried. Nothing stayed lit. Only the fire in the hearth remained, its flames strangely steady, almost watchful. I sat on the edge of the bed, unable to shake the sensation that I was not alone. The silence in the room had changed. It wasn't empty anymore. It was occupied. I scanned the shadows pooling in the corners, eyes adjusting to the flickering glow. Then I saw it. A wet footprint on the wooden floorboards, just inside the doorway. My breath caught. Another appeared beside it. Then another, leading slowly toward the center of the room. I stood, every instinct screaming at me to run, but my body wouldn't move. The footprints stopped just a few feet from where I stood. Then, a soft creak behind me. I turned slowly toward the window, where the rain now poured harder than ever. On the inside of the glass, a handprint appeared, pressed from the inside. My knees nearly buckled. Something had come with the rain, and it was already here. A knock echoed once more at the door, louder this time. I didn't answer. I couldn't. A voice followed, low, calm, and impossibly close. "Do you remember now?" it asked. I couldn't see anyone, but the presence filled the room like fog. Then silence. The handprint vanished. The fireplace dimmed. I sat back on the bed, trembling. I was no longer just a traveler who stumbled into a forgotten place. Eldermeyer had chosen me, and the rain was only beginning. Morning never came, at least not the way it should have. When I opened the curtains expecting gray dawnlight, I was met with the same dense, bluish fog and unrelenting drizzle that had blanketed the village the night before. The sky remained, the color of slate, timeless and unmoving. I checked my phone for the time, but the screen stayed black, refusing to turn on. It was as if Eldermeyer existed in its own forgotten pocket of time, unreachable and unmoving. I needed answers. With shaking hands, I dressed and stepped out into the corridor. The hallway was darker than I remembered, the paintings warped and slightly different. Eyes turned in new directions, expressions subtly altered. I told myself it was my imagination. But the unease crawled across my skin like a cold draft. When I reached the stairs, I paused, listening. The inn was silent, the kind of silence that made you doubt your own footsteps. Downstairs, the lobby stood empty. No sign of the old woman, the innkeeper, or any other guest. The fire had died, leaving only a nest of gray embers. I stepped outside into the morning fog, or what I assumed was morning. The square was barely visible now, buildings fading in and out like ghosts. Yet through the haze, a single lantern swung from a post, its flame steady despite the moisture in the air. That small flame felt like an anchor to something real. Drawn to the light, I followed the cobbled path toward it, boots crunching softly against the soaked stone. As I reached the post, I realized it wasn't alone. More lanterns, faint and spaced irregularly, lined a narrow trail leading out of the square and into the woods beyond. I hesitated, heart pounding. The smart thing would be to wait until the weather cleared, or until someone, anyone, appeared. But I felt pulled, like the path was meant for me and me alone. With cautious steps, I followed the lantern-lit trail, the fog curling around my legs like a living thing. The woods swallowed me quickly, trees looming tall and silent, their trunks glistening with moisture. The lanterns flickered softly, guiding me deeper into the forest. 100 questions buzzed in my head, none with answers. Why had the village chosen now to appear? Why had I been drawn in? And why did I feel as though the rain itself was listening? I passed a decaying wooden fence, half swallowed by vines and moss, where the trail bent sharply and the trees thickened. The fog seemed heavier here, pressing against my skin like wet cloth. My breath came out in shallow clouds, and I could no longer hear my own footsteps. That eerie quiet was broken suddenly by a soft chime, delicate and metallic. like wind passing through glass. I froze, listening. It sounded again, closer this time, though no breeze stirred the trees. "Hello?" I called, my voice barely more than a whisper. It vanished instantly into the mist. A shape moved ahead, just beyond the next lantern. My pulse quickened as I stepped forward, peering into the fog. It was a man, tall, thin, wrapped in a heavy coat, and holding a dim lantern of his own. He stood still, as though waiting. I raised a hand in greeting, but he made no response. Just stood there, unmoving, his face obscured by the shadow of a wide-brimmed hat. I approached slowly, calling out again. "Hey, do you know what's going on in this village?" Still no answer. When I was just a few feet away, the man finally turned. But instead of speaking, he lifted his lantern toward my face. Its flame flared unnaturally bright, stinging my eyes and forcing me to shield them. When I looked again, he was gone. Completely vanished. No footsteps, no movement, not even a sound. Only the next lantern ahead remained, flickering in silence. My legs felt unsteady as I moved forward, nerves fraying with every step. The trees grew denser here, their branches tangled like arthritic fingers, draped in wet moss. The path narrowed to a thin line of worn stones, half buried beneath roots. The sound of distant dripping water filled the air, along with a low, pulsing hum I couldn't place. Subtle, but persistent. I could feel it in my teeth, like a vibration echoing from underground. Suddenly, the ground beneath me shifted. One of the stones gave way and I stumbled, nearly falling. As I regained my balance, I saw something protruding from the soil. An old shoe, half buried and rotted through. My heart skipped. I reached down hesitantly, brushing away the damp earth. Beneath it was a second shoe, still laced, still upright, as though someone had simply vanished from within them. I looked around in panic, realizing that the forest was filled with silence too deep to be natural. I stood motionless, listening. The sound of dripping water returned, louder now, rhythmic and deliberate, as if mimicking footsteps. I turned in every direction, trying to locate the source, but the fog played tricks on my senses. Then I saw it. Another lantern farther ahead, swinging violently as if someone had just run past it. My instinct screamed at me to go back, but the thought of returning to the inn, to that empty room and cryptic message in the ashes, felt just as wrong. With shallow breaths, I pressed on, stepping over roots and soggy leaves, my eyes fixed on the pulsing glow ahead. The trees thinned slightly, revealing a small clearing surrounded by weathered stone markers. I realized with a jolt that they were gravestones, some upright, others toppled or half sunken into the ground. The lantern here burned brighter than the rest, casting eerie shadows over names too eroded to read. I could just make out the word "remember" carved crudely into the nearest stone. Something rustled behind me. I turned, expecting another illusion, but this time a figure stepped forward, slowly, carefully, as if stepping from behind the veil of mist itself. It was a young girl, no more than 12, dressed in a pale, old-fashioned dress soaked from the rain. Her long hair clung to her face, and her eyes held a vacant, faraway look. "You shouldn't be here," she said softly, voice barely audible over the pattering rain. "They don't like it when someone sees too much." I knelt instinctively, trying to meet her gaze. "Who are you? What is this place?" I asked gently. But she shook her head, eyes flicking toward the trees. "The rain woke them. They sleep when it's dry. But you came in the wet. That's when the village remembers." Her words sent a chill through me, and I felt the hair on my arm stand, on end. I wanted to ask more, but she began backing away, eyes wide with fear. "Wait," I called, rising to follow her, but she disappeared behind a crumbling statue, and when I reached it, she was gone. No footprints, no trace. Only the rain remained, falling steadily in sheets. I turned in place, trying to gather my thoughts. The path back had vanished, replaced by trees I didn't recognize, and fog so thick it was like a wall. The village, the inn, even the lanterns. I couldn't see them anymore. I was no longer following a trail. I was lost. I called out, hoping the girl might answer, or perhaps the innkeeper, or even the strange man with the lantern. But only my own voice returned to me, distorted and distant, as if the forest itself were mocking me. The fog wrapped, tighter around my chest, making it hard to breathe. I reached into my coat pocket for my phone again, still dead. The screen reflected nothing but the faint orange glow of the remaining lanterns, now distant and flickering. A sudden crack echoed nearby, sharp and close, like a branch snapping underfoot. I froze. My eyes scanned the mist, but all I saw were shifting shapes in the rain. Then slowly something emerged. A figure, stooped and shuffling, wrapped in heavy wet cloth that clung to its thin frame. Its face was hidden beneath a hood. It stopped several feet from me, not speaking, not moving, only breathing. I couldn't see its eyes, but I could feel them on me, heavy and knowing. "Are you from the village?" I asked, my voice hoarse. The figure tilted its head slowly, then raised one skeletal hand and pointed, not at me, but past me, toward the path I had come from. I turned. The lanterns had returned, but they no longer led deeper into the woods. Now they curved behind me, forming a new path back toward the village. When I turned again to thank the figure, it was gone. Only the faint imprint of bare feet remained in the mud. I followed the lanterns, heart racing, drenched and shivering. The deeper I went, the more the forest seemed to press inward, as if resisting my return. Branches scratched my arms, roots tangled my steps, and the rain fell harder, soaking through my clothes and into my bones. Finally, after what felt like hours, I saw the silhouette of the inn through the fog, its windows glowing weakly, flickering like dying stars in the storm. Relief flooded through me, but something had changed. The door to my room stood open when I entered, though I remembered locking it. The fire was out, the air cold and unmoving. On the wall above the bed, a new painting had appeared. It showed a cloaked figure standing in the fog, one hand raised, pointing. I stared, unable to look away. It was the same figure from the woods. Only now, the face beneath the hood was visible. It was mine. And beneath it, barely legible in dark red paint, "You are beginning to remember." The storm never truly stopped. It only paused, like a breath held too long. I awoke with a start. The air in the room stale and unmoving, as if the walls had exhaled something ancient during the night. My clothes were still damp from the forest, clinging coldly to my skin. I sat on the edge of the bed, eyes fixed on the painting that now hung above it. My own face stared back at me from beneath the hood, as if daring me to question what I thought I knew. I stood and approached the painting, heart pounding with each step. The longer I looked, the more it shifted. Subtle changes in my expression, the fog swirling behind me, the hand now reaching toward me rather than simply pointing. I reached out to touch the canvas, but my fingers stopped just short. It felt like a mirror in motion, not a painting at all. The words beneath the figure, "You are beginning to remember," burned brighter now, like embers glowing beneath old ash. A knock interrupted my thoughts, not at the door, but the window. I spun around. Someone stood outside, pressed against the glass, soaked to the bone. I stepped cautiously forward. It was the girl from the graveyard. She looked the same. Wet dress, tangled hair, pale skin. But her expression had changed. She looked afraid. Her mouth moved, forming a single word I couldn't hear, again and again. I wiped the fog from the glass, but by the time my vision cleared, she was gone. I opened the window and leaned out into the chill. Rain had started again, softer now, like whispers tapping at the rooftops. The village below was still. No movement, no sound, only the faint glow of lamps through the haze. I was about to close the window when I noticed something etched into the sill. Letters carved roughly into the wood, worn down by time and weather. It was my name, in my own handwriting. I recoiled, the realization crashing over me like a wave. I staggered back into the room, breath shallow and fast. The inn creaked around me, its old frame groaning in response to the weight of something unseen. This wasn't just a village that appeared in the rain. It knew me. Not just my name, but something deeper. I grabbed my coat and stepped into the hallway, determined to find answers. I needed to speak to someone, anyone. I needed to know why Eldermeyer felt like a memory I'd tried to bury. The hallway outside was dimmer than before, the sconces along the walls burning lower, their flames shivering as if nervous. The air smelled of damp stone and lavender, an odd, conflicting mix of decay and comfort. As I descended the stairs, each step creaked louder than the last, echoing down into the lobby. The innkeeper was there again, standing motionless behind the desk, eyes already fixed on me as if he had been waiting. His hands rested on the counter, unmoving, fingers lightly tapping a rhythm I couldn't place. "I saw her," I said without preamble. "The girl, at my window." The innkeeper didn't flinch. He merely nodded once, slowly, as if confirming a fact long accepted. "They visit those the rain remembers," he said. His voice had changed, softer now, almost sorrowful. "And the rain remembers you, even if you've forgotten it." I stepped closer, feeling the heat from the fireless hearth behind him. "Why me? What does this place want from me?" He didn't answer. Instead, he slid something toward me, a folded piece of yellowing parchment. I unfolded it carefully. It was a hand-drawn map, sketched in ink that had run with time. The village was there, Eldermeyer, but not as I'd seen it. The streets were different. There were no lanterns and no inn marked on the page. In one corner, a name was scribbled, faintly, A. Rowan. My breath hitched. That was my last name. I looked up sharply, but the innkeeper was gone. No sound, no movement, just the soft pattering of rain returning outside. I rushed to the door and flung it open. The village had shifted. Again, the buildings looked older, weather-worn and cracked, shutters hanging askew, paint stripped by time. The cobblestones beneath my feet were slick with moss. The inn, once sturdy and warm, looked hollowed out, like an abandoned memory still pretending to be real. In the distance, I saw the church bell tower, one I hadn't noticed before, looming above the roofs. Its bell swung gently, though no wind stirred the air. Drawn toward it, I crossed the square. The lanterns had returned, but they now cast a sickly green glow, each flame swaying as though breathing. The streets were lined with unfamiliar faces, people in clothes from different eras, all silent, all watching. None spoke. Their expressions were blank, as if carved in wax. One of them, a tall man in suspenders, whispered as I passed, though his lips barely moved. "You left once. You shouldn't have returned." I turned to confront him, but he was already gone. The path to the church was uneven, broken by years of neglect, or perhaps something more deliberate. As I approached, I noticed a crack in the bell tower's foundation, a jagged split that ran up the stone like a scar. Vines had grown into the crevice, twisting as though pulled from within. The massive wooden doors were slightly ajar, swaying, with a slow rhythm. I hesitated at the threshold, the rain soft on my shoulders, before stepping into the cool gloom beyond. Inside, the air was heavy with damp incense and dust. Pews lined the nave, warped and rotting, and the altar at the far end was covered with a faded cloth stained deep maroon. Atop it sat an open book, its pages fluttering though no breeze moved. As I stepped forward, I heard the door creak shut behind me, followed by the slow tolling of the bell above. Each chime echoed down the stone walls like a heartbeat, slow, deliberate, full of weight. I approached the altar with caution, eyes fixed on the book. The pages were handwritten, densely packed with script in a language I didn't recognize. But one phrase repeated on every page, always centered and slightly larger. Rain reveals. Rain remembers. As I stared, drops of water began falling from the ceiling, though there were no leaks. They landed on the open pages, spreading ink like veins through paper. The letters blurred, but the phrase remained intact. Footsteps echoed behind me. I turned quickly, heart leaping, only to find the girl again. She stood in the center aisle, hands clasped before her, water pooling around her bare feet. "It was you," she said softly, eyes shimmering. "You were the first to leave." My mouth went dry. "Leave what? I've never been here before." She shook her head slowly. "Not in this life, but the village never forgets. And neither does the rain." Her words pressed against my mind like memories I couldn't access. The bell tolled again, louder now, as if in warning. The girl flinched and backed away, her figure flickering like flame in the wind. "They're waking," she whispered. "And they're angry." I stepped toward her, but she vanished into mist, gone as quickly as she appeared. The water on, the floor deepened suddenly, lapping over my shoes. I looked down. The book had sunk into the altar, swallowed by the wood like a stone vanishing beneath the surface of a dark lake. I backed away from the altar, the rising water making each step a struggle. The pews groaned as if reacting to my presence, wood warping under unseen pressure. The bell above rang one final time, this one deeper, slower, almost mournful. I turned toward the doors, but they were no longer there. In their place stood a solid stone wall, slick with moisture and pulsing faintly with light. The air smelled of wet earth and old iron. I wasn't in the church anymore. I wasn't sure I was even in Eldermire. Around me, the walls shifted, becoming something else, something breathing. Shadows undulated just beyond reach, forming half-glimpsed figures with long limbs and hollow eyes. They whispered to each other, in broken syllables, voices layered like rain on rooftops. One stepped closer, its silhouette wavering like smoke. "You opened the window," it said in a voice that sounded eerily like mine. "You carved your name." Its hand reached toward my chest, and I felt heat radiating from it. Heat and memory. Suddenly, I was somewhere else. A field of wild grass under heavy storm clouds. A younger version of myself, barely a teenager, stood at the edge of a hill, watching the village below flicker in and out of existence with each lightning strike. The air had smelled just like this. The voices, the fog, the girl. I had seen them before. I had been here. I had run. I had forgotten. The vision faded as fast as it had come, leaving behind only aching clarity. When I came to, I was outside again, lying on wet cobblestones in the village square. The rain had grown heavier, falling in thick sheets that blurred the world. Around me, the villagers stood in a circle, silent and unmoving, eyes all on me. Their mouths began to move in unison, whispering something I couldn't hear over the storm. But I knew what they were saying. He remembers. The words weren't meant as accusation. They were ritual, confirmation, perhaps even relief. A single lantern flickered to life beside me. I stood, legs trembling, heart pounding. The villagers began to fade into the mist, one by one, until only I remained. The girl's voice echoed faintly from nowhere and everywhere. You left, but now the village holds you again. I looked, around, the rain soaking every thread of me, but I no longer felt like an outsider. I belonged to Eldermire now. Or perhaps I always had. The rain had known all along. The rain had eased into a steady drizzle, fine and cold like a veil drawn across the village. I wandered aimlessly through unfamiliar streets, guided only by instinct and a strange pull in my chest. The fog had returned, thicker than ever, clinging to the rooftops and winding around lampposts like smoke. That's when I saw it. At the edge of the village, beyond a crooked iron gate half swallowed by weeds, stood a house I hadn't noticed before. Tall, narrow, and entirely devoid of windows. Unlike the other buildings in Eldermire, this house looked untouched by time. No chipped paint, no moss-covered bricks. Its walls were dark wood, polished and smooth, glistening wet under the dim glow of the nearest lantern. Yet it reflected nothing. No light, no shadows, no image of the street or rain or even myself. I stood before it for several minutes, expecting movement from within, a sound, a breath. But it remained silent, unnaturally still, like a portrait painted without a subject. The iron gate creaked open with minimal effort, its hinges groaning in protest. As I stepped through, a cold gust of air pushed against me. Not wind, but pressure, as if the house itself were exhaling. The stone path to the door was lined with dead flowers, their petals blackened and dripping. Each step I took felt heavier than the last, as though the house was resisting my presence. When I reached the door, I found it slightly ajar, swaying, gently like it had been waiting. I pushed it open and stepped inside. The temperature dropped immediately, the air dry and biting despite the rain outside. The interior was pristine, immaculate wood floors, ornate rugs, a staircase that spiraled upward into darkness. But there were no mirrors, no pictures, no glass of any kind, and yet every surface shimmered faintly, like it absorbed light instead of bouncing it back. I called out, just once. My voice fell flat, absorbed instantly by the walls. A hallway stretched before me, impossibly long, lined with closed doors. I moved forward cautiously, my footsteps muffled despite the hardwood beneath them. With each door I passed, I felt an increasing sense of familiarity, a whiff of perfume I couldn't quite name, a melody I might have hummed once. One door stood slightly open, light spilling from the crack like golden syrup. I reached for it slowly, heart hammering, as if something on the other side already knew I was there. I pushed the door open with slow, deliberate care. The room beyond was warm, lit by a chandelier that swayed gently, though the air was still. A grand piano stood near the windowless wall, its lid open as if someone had just played it. On the surface, a single sheet of music rested, yellowed, handwritten, and stained by something dark. I stepped closer to read the title, Lullaby for the Forgotten. The notes on the staff felt hauntingly familiar, though I didn't know how. I recognized them. A chair beside the piano shifted suddenly, scraping across the floor as though someone had stood up from it. I spun around, breath caught in my throat. No one was there. But the chandelier's sway grew faster, and the piano let out a soft, trembling chord, as if a key had been pressed by invisible fingers. I backed away slowly, eyes darting across the room. On the far wall, there was a long console with a mirror frame mounted above it, but no mirror within. Just a hollow rectangle, empty and dark. I moved toward the empty frame, compelled by something deeper than curiosity. The frame was ornately carved with roses and thorns, their patterns flowing endlessly like tangled vines. As I leaned closer, I expected to see only darkness, but something stirred. Not a reflection, a version. A dim silhouette of myself moved inside the frame, delayed by half a second. It tilted its head when I did not. Its eyes blinked when mine stayed open. It was watching me. Panic gripped my chest. I turned away, but the chandelier shattered above me with a loud crack, glass spraying across the room like rain. I fell to the floor, shielding my head. When I looked up, the lights were gone. Darkness swallowed the space in a single breath, and I could no longer see the piano, the frame, or even the door behind me. But I felt something else, breathing, just inches from my ear. Hot and ragged, each exhale laced with a memory I didn't recognize as my own. Then came a whisper, so close it vibrated in my bones. "You left us here." The voice was layered, childlike, elderly, male and female all at once. I stumbled to my feet and bolted from the room, slamming the door behind me. In the hallway, all the doors now stood open, revealing identical empty rooms, each one darker than the last. The staircase loomed ahead, curling upward like a spine. With nowhere else to go, I climbed, each step echoing like a question I wasn't ready to answer. The staircase grew colder as I ascended, the air growing thinner with every step. My breath turned visible, hanging in front of me like smoke in the dark. The walls narrowed, curving inward, pressing close like ribs of some ancient creature. When I reached the top, I found a single hallway with only one door. It was unmarked, wide open, and inside glowed a dull orange light that pulsed softly, as though mimicking a heartbeat. I stepped inside and found a circular room, the walls entirely, covered in mirror frames, but like the one below, all of them were empty. Dozens of frames, some large and ornate, others cracked and crooked, yet none held glass. At the center of the room stood a pedestal, and atop it, a bowl filled with murky water. The pulsing glow seemed to come from within the bowl itself. As I approached, I caught my reflection, not in the frames, but in the water. What I saw wasn't me. It was my face, but older, worn, hollow-eyed, soaked from head to toe. My lips were moving, silently mouthing something I couldn't hear. I leaned in, desperate to understand. And then it screamed, a silent, twisted scream that rippled across the surface, breaking the illusion and sending the water sloshing violently over the edges. I stumbled back, heart hammering. Every frame in the room began to vibrate, a low hum building like pressure before a storm. The walls around me shimmered, and the room began to change. The mirrors filled with movement, dozens of versions of myself, walking, running, falling, crying. Each one trapped in its own frame, like memories on loop. I saw myself as a child, reaching for someone unseen. As a teen, screaming into an empty field. As an adult, running through fog. Each reflection looked back at me in turn, pleading, warning, remembering. And then, all at once, they pointed behind me. I turned slowly. A figure stood at the entrance of the room, tall, thin, face completely obscured by a black veil. It didn't speak, but its presence was suffocating, pressing, against my thoughts like a tide. In its hand was a small shard of mirror, dripping water onto the floor. It extended the shard toward me as if offering it. My instinct screamed to run, but my feet remained planted. I reached out with trembling fingers, the voices in the mirrors whispering as one. To see the truth, you must break what hides it. As my fingers closed around the shard, a jolt of cold surged through my body, sharper than ice, deeper than fear. The figure released it without resistance and faded into the wall like smoke drawn into a crack. I was left alone, standing in a circle of reflections that now rippled like disturbed water. The shard pulsed faintly in my hand, its jagged edge catching the orange glow still emanating from the bowl. Without fully knowing why, I stepped toward the nearest empty frame. The mirror's surface remained dark, but as I lifted the shard, it began to hum, vibrating in my hand, pulling toward the void as if it belonged there. With a deep breath, I pressed the shard against the center of the frame. The moment it touched, the room changed. Light vanished. The frames went still. The sound of falling rain ceased completely, replaced by a low, humming silence so dense it filled my head. Then, slowly, the surface of the frame opened like an eye. Inside it, I saw not a reflection, but a memory. I was standing in this very room, younger, panicked, shouting someone's name. A girl's voice called back, distant and afraid. I saw myself take the shard from the pedestal. I saw myself stab it into the bowl. The room collapsed around me. The house shuddered, and I disappeared into the mirrors, one of many trapped versions. The image blurred, then faded. When I looked down, the shard in my hand was gone. The rain returned all at once, hammering the roof, the windows, the walls. The house groaned, as if waking from a long sleep. I turned to leave, but the staircase was gone. In its place stood another door, wide open, leading into pitch blackness. The mirror frames around the room began to crack one by one. Fractures, spreading like lightning. I didn't have time to think. I ran through the open door, into the dark, not knowing what waited beyond. I emerged outside. The house stood behind me, unchanged, but silent. The rain had lightened again, misting gently across the village square. I turned back once more. The house reflected nothing. Not the sky, not the rain, not even me. But I no longer needed a reflection to know I was changed. I could feel pieces of myself rearranged, memory stirred awake. Somewhere, the girl I'd once left behind was waiting, and Eldermeyer wasn't finished showing me what I had forgotten. The fog thickened as I stepped away from the house, curling around my ankles like mist with memory. The rain had shifted again, no longer falling from above, but rising, almost drifting upward like steam. The square was deserted, but not silent. Faint voices, no louder than a breath, danced on the edges of the breeze. They whispered in fragmented phrases, half-lost names, broken questions, regrets. I turned slowly, trying to find the source, but there was no one there. Only the sound of wet stone beneath my boots, and the murmurs of unseen things. A narrow path had appeared between two buildings, a place I was sure hadn't existed before. Vines arched over the entrance, glistening with dew that pulsed faintly, as if lit from within. Something in my chest tightened, an invisible thread pulling me forward. The whispers grew clearer here, no longer random noise, but familiar voices I couldn't quite place. A woman's laugh, a child humming, my own voice, echoing back in a tone I didn't remember ever using. "We've walked this way before," it said. I hesitated at the threshold, glancing back toward the square. The house behind me had vanished. In its place stood a garden, overgrown and humming softly. Eldermeyer was changing again, folding in on itself like a memory being rewritten. With no other choice, I stepped into the path. The walls of fog closed in quickly, muting the world. The cobblestones were uneven, damp, and veined with moss. As I walked, I noticed small objects embedded in the ground. Buttons, coins, teeth. Tiny remnants of people long gone. The path bent sharply, revealing a stone archway inscribed with faint lettering worn by time. I leaned closer, brushing away wet moss with my sleeve. The words became visible. What you forget will walk beside you. As I read it aloud, a cold wind rose from nowhere, and the whispers returned, louder now, more urgent. I turned around, but saw only shifting silhouettes behind the mist. They stayed at the edge of vision, never stepping forward, never vanishing completely, like shadows cast by forgotten memories. Suddenly, the path split. To the left, a trail descended into a grove filled with unmoving trees, their trunks white as bone. To the right, narrow stairs climbed into darkness, swallowed by overhanging vines. Both directions hummed with energy, both felt familiar. A decision pressed against me, not logical, but emotional, as if part of me already knew what waited down each way. The whispers paused, holding their breath. I took one slow step toward the stairs. The stairs were damp and slick, carved from uneven stone, each step worn down by time or repetition. As I climbed, the light dimmed until all I had was the faint glow of moss clinging to the walls. The silence returned, not emptiness, but the tense quiet that comes before something breaks. Then came a sound, the echo of footsteps that weren't mine. I stopped, breath caught, heart pounding. The steps continued, slow and deliberate, as though someone, or something, was mirroring me. I turned quickly, scanning the staircase behind me. Nothing. Only fog curling upward, following in my wake. Still, the footsteps persisted. I began, climbing again, faster now, hand trailing the slick stone wall for balance. The air thickened, smelling of old paper and burned wood. A voice, calm and low, began to hum. I knew the melody. It was the same one I had seen scribbled on the piano sheet back in the house. Lullaby for the forgotten. At the top of the stairs, a wooden door blocked my path. Unlike the rest of Eldermeyer, it looked new. Too clean, too smooth, as if freshly placed just for me. The humming stopped as I reached for the handle. For a moment, all was still. I opened the door slowly. Inside was a small room filled with bookshelves. The walls were lined with journals, photo albums, and maps. A single chair sat beneath a hanging lantern, and in the chair, someone waited. It was a man, mid-40s, hair graying at the temples, coat soaked through with rain. He looked up at me with tired eyes. I froze. It was like looking into a mirror of what I might become. "I knew you'd come eventually," he said. His voice was raspy but kind. "You've been circling the same story for years." I stepped inside, heart pounding, throat dry. "Who are you?" I asked. But even as I spoke, part of me already knew. "I'm the part of you that stayed," he replied simply. "The part that never left Eldermeyer." He motioned to the shelves. "These are your memories, the ones you sealed away when you ran." I moved to the nearest shelf, brushing dust from the spine of a red book. My name was etched faintly on the cover. I opened it and found pages filled with drawings of places I hadn't remembered visiting, until now. The well behind the inn, the stone bench, the field with the lightning. It all came rushing back, uninvited and undeniable. My hands trembled as I turned the pages, each one unlocking something dormant. Faces I had forgotten smiled up at me in faded ink. Children, neighbors, strangers I now recognized. In one sketch, I stood beside the girl in the pale dress, both of us holding lanterns, beneath the archway I had just passed. I didn't remember the moment, but my hand had drawn it. "You stayed behind," I whispered, glancing at the man in the chair. He nodded, not proudly, not sadly, just truthfully. I stayed because someone had to remember, he said. The village exists in memory, in echoes. Every time it rains, it calls to those who touched it once. He stood, moving to a nearby shelf and retrieving a small box. It was wooden, carved with the same rose and thorn pattern from the mirror frame. You buried this before you left. I've kept it safe. He handed it to me, and the weight in my hands felt far heavier than the box itself. I opened the lid. Inside was a small lantern, no taller than my palm. The flame within flickered to life the moment I looked at it. No match, no fuel, just memory. Beneath the lantern sat a slip of paper, brittle and folded many times over. I opened it carefully. It held a single sentence, written in a child's shaky script. Don't forget me again. My vision blurred. I didn't know who the message was from. Or maybe I did, and just couldn't face it yet. The room pulsed softly, the shelves vibrating, with a sound like distant thunder. The man placed a hand on my shoulder. It's time to go deeper, he said. There are things you still need to see. Paths you never walked. People you left behind. I looked into his eyes and saw something. Ancient there, patience born of solitude. Will I remember everything? I asked. He gave a faint smile. Only if you stop running. He stepped back into the shadows and disappeared, as quietly as he had arrived. The door behind me swung open again, revealing a new path, one I hadn't taken, one that hadn't existed before. The lantern in my hand glowed brighter, sensing the shift. I stepped forward. The whispers outside had returned, but now they spoke with clarity. Not warnings, not threats, just memories, calling my name like an invitation home. I stepped through the door and back into the village. But it was different again. Older, quieter, wrapped in twilight that bled through the clouds like faded ink. The buildings were skeletal now, stripped of paint and life, their shapes warped by time. Yet the path beneath my feet glowed faintly with each step I took, lit by the lantern in my hand. Whispers rose and fell around me, not chaotic now, but in harmony, like a song only memory could compose. As I walked, faces appeared in the fog. Some I knew, others I felt I should know. They didn't speak, but they smiled, kindly, sadly, knowingly. A boy with freckles handed me a marble before vanishing. A woman with braided hair placed a flower on my shoulder, then disappeared into the mist. Each gesture carried meaning beyond words. Each one returned a piece of something I had lost long ago. I could feel myself reassembling, breath by breath. The path ended at a broken well in the center of a field, its stones cracked and vines crawling through its base. The lantern's glow intensified. I stepped closer and peered inside. There was no water, only a void of lightless depth. But I wasn't afraid. I reached into my coat pocket and found the paper from the box still there. Don't forget me again. I whispered the words aloud, and they echoed down into the dark like a promise. From the bottom of the well came a voice, not echo, not illusion. A girl's voice. You remember. I knelt beside the edge, heart pounding. Who are you? I asked. Why do I feel like I left you? The silence that followed was warm, filled with emotion too vast to name. Then came her answer, soft and steady. You didn't leave me. You left yourself. The fog around the field began to dissolve, and for the first time, I saw the stars break through the clouds above. I stood slowly, lantern in hand. Rain, no longer falling. The path behind me had vanished, but I didn't need it anymore. Eldermeyer pulsed around me, not as a trap, but as a reflection. It was never just a village. It was grief, memory, healing. A place that appeared only when needed to those who had something to reclaim. I turned toward the horizon, where dawn was just beginning to break. And I walked, finally remembering who I had been, and ready to find who I still was. I had thought the rain was over, that the memories had settled, and Eldermire had released its hold. But as I crossed the hill beyond the well, a new storm gathered, slow and patient, like a breath held too long. The sky darkened not with clouds, but with something heavier, remembrance. The first drop struck my shoulder like a whisper, then another, and another. The rain was back, but it was different now. It wasn't falling on me. It was falling with me. The ground beneath my feet had changed. No longer cobblestone or forest soil, but glassy black rock veined with pale light, as if the earth had cracked, open to reveal memory itself. The trees were gone. In their place stood towering stone monuments, some intact, others shattered. Each one bore a name. As I passed, a few began to glow faintly, illuminating the path forward. I didn't recognize the names, but each one stirred something in me. An ache, a guilt, a face I couldn't place. The rain grew louder, not with thunder, but with voices. Dozens layered atop one another, speaking in harmony and chaos. Not all were human. Some whispered, some wept, and others simply breathed. The air vibrated with emotion too old for language. I held the lantern tightly, its flame flickering in rhythm with the storm. Then, through the haze, I saw a figure standing among the monuments. Small, still, hands clasped before her, as if in prayer. The girl in the pale dress. She didn't run, this time. She waited for me. As I approached, she lifted her eyes filled with stars, not reflections. "You came back," she said, her voice clear despite the downpour. "Not because the village called you, but because you finally listened." I knelt before her, unsure what to say. The last time I saw her, she vanished before I could ask her name. Now, she placed a hand on my chest, right above my heart. "It's still in there," she whispered. "The part you locked away." "Who are you?" I asked, though my voice cracked under the weight of the moment. She tilted her head and rain trickled down her cheeks like tears. "I was your promise," she said. "The one you made before you forgot. I was what you left behind the first time you fled the storm." Around us, the rain slowed, the monuments glowing brighter. "You don't have to run anymore," she added, "but you do have to choose." I felt the world holding its breath. She turned and walked deeper into the field of monuments, her bare feet making no sound against the wet stone. I followed, the rain forming a narrow path around us, like it knew where we were going. As we passed each monument, fragments of sound emerged, laughing, crying, arguing, moments frozen in time. I recognized my own voice in some of them. Others were strangers, or maybe not. Maybe they were parts of me I had chosen not to remember. We stopped before a broken monument lying in pieces on the ground. The engraving had been split, the name unreadable, as though erased deliberately. The girl knelt beside it, placing her hand over the shattered inscription. "This was the moment you turned away," she said softly. "You buried the truth here, hoping it would be forgotten." I stared at the stone, but no memory surfaced. Only the feeling that something vital had been torn out and hidden too well. Without asking, I reached for the pieces, trying to reassemble them. The stone was cold, slick with rain, heavy with meaning. As I worked, the sky flickered with silver, light, not lightning, but memory, streaking across the clouds like old film. The girl watched in silence as I fit the last shard in place. The name reappeared, slowly, painfully clear. Rowan A. My name. Not someone I lost. Someone I was. This was the grave of my forgotten self. As the truth settled, the rain shifted. It didn't fall harder. It fell cleaner, washing through me instead of against me. My breath caught as 100 memories cascaded into place. Childhood games in the fog, promises whispered at night. The moment I walked away from this village and everything it held, I had forgotten who I was. Not because I wanted to, but because remembering hurt. But pain wasn't the enemy. Denial was. The girl took my hand. "You can leave now," she said, "if you want to." I looked around, at the field, the monuments, the shifting sky. "And if I stay?" I asked. Her expression didn't change. "Then you'll see what you truly are, and what Eldermeyer was always trying to show you." The choice was mine. For the first time, the village was offering freedom, not trapping me in memory, but inviting me to walk through it, fully awake. I closed my eyes and let the rain fall freely against my face. It no longer felt cold, no longer heavy. It was like a baptism, not to wash away who I'd been, but to welcome who I was becoming. The girl stood quietly beside me, her presence no longer ghostly but grounding. For the first time, I felt as if I wasn't being haunted by Eldermeyer. I was part of it. I had always been part of it. The forgetting had only delayed the inevitable return. A sound rose through the field, a low chime, distant and soft, like wind playing across hollow glass. It came from the edge of the monuments, where a new path had opened. Lanterns lined its sides, suspended not by posts, but floating mid-air, flickering with a pale blue flame. "This path leads beyond memory," the girl said, "to the place where those who remember can shape what's next." I looked down the glowing corridor, unsure of what waited, but unafraid for the first time. We walked side by side, her small hand still holding mine, the lantern in my other hand pulsing gently with each step. The path narrowed, the monuments fading behind us, swallowed once more by mist and distance. I glanced back only once, and when I did, I saw the versions of myself again. Some standing alone, others looking up at the sky. But none were afraid. They simply watched, and one by one, they nodded. I nodded back, silently acknowledging all I had been. Ahead, the path ended at a great circular arch, carved from black stone etched with glowing runes. Beneath it, a pool shimmered with light that rippled outward like breath. It didn't reflect the sky. It reflected only the truth. The girl stopped at its edge. "I can't go further," she said, her voice soft. "This part is only for you." I turned to her, a question on my lips, but she simply smiled. "You already know my name. You've always known it." She stepped backward, dissolving slowly into rain and starlight, her smile the last thing to fade. I stood alone, the lantern dimming in my hand, the pool before me waiting. The final choice. Not to leave or stay, but to accept. I took a breath, heart full, mind clear, and stepped forward into the light. The rain didn't follow. It had done its work. And now, at last, I was ready to begin remembering without fear. The moment my foot touched the pool's surface, it rippled outward like warm breath on glass. But instead of falling through, I stood on it, weightless, suspended. The light below shifted, revealing scenes not from the past, but possibilities. Lives I might still live, choices I had yet to make. Eldermeyer wasn't just memory, it was potential. A mirror not of who I had been, but of who I could become. I stood in the center, letting it show me all versions of myself. Some broken, some whole, all real. The sky above opened like a curtain, revealing stars I hadn't seen in years, bright, bold, and endless. The rain had truly stopped, not just around me, but inside me. I could feel it, the absence of the weight I'd carried, the fear I'd avoided. I raised the lantern one final time, its light now steady, unwavering. I placed it at the edge of the pool. It floated gently away, casting long, slow arcs of light across the water, like a final memory sent home. A voice spoke. Not external, not imagined, but something from deep within. "You're ready." It was the voice I had forgotten, the one that had been silenced beneath fear, grief, and denial. It guided me not with commands, but with presence, with truth. I turned from the pool and walked toward the far edge of the archway. As I stepped through, the world around me didn't vanish. It expanded. The path returned. The village faded gently behind me. And yet, it remained, etched into me. When I looked back one last time, Eldermire no longer seemed like a trap or a ghost town. It was still there, quiet and waiting. Not for me anymore, but for the next traveler who needed to remember. I understood now why it appeared only in the rain. Rain brings life. It uncovers, renews, and washes away the lies we tell ourselves. And only those brave enough to walk through memory could ever find the path home. Not to a place, but to themselves. Walked forward into a dawn unlike any I'd ever known. The sky above was clear, the earth beneath warm and real. I wasn't the same person who had driven into the storm that night. That version had been a shadow of who I was meant to be. Eldermire had shown me everything I feared, but it had also shown me something stronger, everything I could become. And as the rain became only a memory, I took my first true step into everything that lay ahead. It had been days, or perhaps only hours, since I left Eldermire. Time moved differently now, like water shifting between fingers. I found myself walking along a narrow country road, the world around me strangely quiet. The rain hadn't returned, but the sky remained overcast, as though the storm lingered just beyond the horizon. Ahead stood a cottage I didn't recognize. It looked simple. Stone walls, sloped roof, ivy climbing the chimney. And yet, something about it made my pulse quicken, like a memory I hadn't lived. The path leading to the front door was lined with white stones, carefully arranged and recently placed. The air smelled of burnt wood and old tea leaves. As I approached, I noticed the door stood ajar, only slightly, but enough to suggest I was expected. I hesitated at the threshold, listening. No sound, no footsteps, no wind, only the faint ticking of a clock somewhere deep inside. I raised my hand to knock, but stopped. Why knock on a door that was already waiting for me? I pushed it open slowly. The hinges groaned in quiet protest. Inside, the cottage was dim, lit by a fireplace casting soft amber light across worn furniture and crooked shelves. Books lined the walls, every one without a title. On the far side of the room sat a man in a wooden chair, his back turned to me. He held a steaming mug in one hand, his other resting on the arm of the chair. "You took your time," he said, his voice calm and familiar. I didn't answer. I stepped inside, letting the door close behind me. The man didn't move. "You always hesitated at doorways," he added with a faint smile in his voice, "even as a boy." I circled slowly to face him, and when I did, I felt the world shift beneath me. He looked like me, older, worn, eyes heavy with stories. But there was something else. He wasn't just another version of me. He was the one who never forgot. The one who stayed behind when I ran. "I've been waiting," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. "You have questions. I have most of the answers." I sat down slowly, heart heavy, unsure if I was speaking to a memory, a warning, or something more permanent. "Is this still Eldermeyer?" I asked. He shook his head. "No," he said. "This is the place between remembering and becoming. And here, everything finally makes sense." The fire crackled softly between us, its warmth oddly grounding. I studied his face, my face, trying to decipher what age had done and what memory had preserved. "You knew I'd come," I said. He nodded. "Everyone returns eventually. The village doesn't let go. Not really. It waits, just like I do." He sipped from the mug slowly, as though time no longer held urgency. "You thought you could outrun yourself, but memory has its own compass, and you were always walking in circles." I looked around the room. Every surface held objects that stirred something deep. An old key, a cracked pocket watch, a faded photograph turned face down. "What is this place, really?" I asked. The older version of me leaned back in the chair. "It's the final threshold," he said. "A place where truth comes to sit down. You've faced shadows, walked through rain, seen what you tried to forget. But you still haven't asked the question that matters." I felt it then, pressing at the edge of my thoughts. A question I'd buried not out of fear, but shame. I looked into his eyes. Did I leave her behind? He didn't flinch. "Yes," he said. The word fell like a stone. "But you didn't know what you were doing. You were just a child, running from something you couldn't name. She stayed behind because she believed you'd come back, and now you have. But memory isn't the same as forgiveness." The room darkened slightly, as if the fire had grown tired. "She was real?" I asked. "Not just a part of me?" He nodded. "She was the last person who saw who you really were, the last light before the fog took hold." My chest tightened. I remembered flashes now, her laughter, her hand in mine, the promise I made in the rain. "Is she still there?" I whispered. "Waiting?" The older version of me didn't answer with words. He simply pointed to the door. I stood slowly, the air around me vibrating with something final. The door was closed now, but light bled through the cracks, soft, pulsing, alive. My hands trembled as I reached for the handle. "If I walk through," I asked, "what happens to you?" He smiled faintly, weariness lining every inch of his face. "I stop waiting," he said, "and you stop running." His words were both farewell and blessing. I opened the door, and the light poured in, flooding the cottage like dawn breaking over a forgotten world. The light didn't blind me. It embraced. Warm, golden, and humming with energy I hadn't felt in years. The world on the other side was not Eldermeyer. It wasn't the village, nor the path, nor the memory. It was something new. A place built not from forgetting or regret, but from all that remained after. Trees stretched skyward, blooming with leaves that shimmered like glass. A river moved beside the trail, its surface reflecting not my face, but my intentions. It was quiet, not the silence of absence, but of peace. I stepped forward. I realized I was walking through memory and into meaning. Each step called back something I'd long buried. The sound of my sister's voice, the warmth of my mother's hand, the day I let go of someone I loved and never said goodbye. But instead of grief, I felt gratitude. These fragments didn't weigh me down anymore. They carried me, held me upright, gave me reason. The world no longer asked me to forget. It simply invited me to remember differently. Far ahead, I saw her. The girl. The one who had waited, walked, whispered. But she wasn't a child anymore. She stood tall beneath the branches of a twisted tree, her dress dry, her eyes bright. As I approached, she smiled, not with sorrow or resentment, but with recognition. "You found the last door," she said. "You opened it." I nodded, breath tight in my throat. "I didn't know how much of you I'd left behind." Her gaze softened. "Enough to hurt, but not enough to forget." We stood in silence beneath the tree. The leaves rustled gently above us, shimmering in rhythm, with her voice. "Do you know who I am now?" she asked. I hesitated, but only for a moment. "You're the promise I made to be whole again," I said. "You're the part I buried because I wasn't ready to feel. But you waited, through every storm." She stepped forward, placing something in my hand. A small stone, smooth and warm. On it, one word: "Stay." The earth stilled. The river hushed. Even the wind held its breath. I understood the invitation, not to linger here forever, but to stop running, to stop forgetting, to let the storm settle within, not just around me. The girl smiled once more, fading gently into light. This time, not vanishing, but becoming part of everything. I stood beneath the tree, stone in my hand, and let myself belong. For the first time since the rain began, I had no need for shelter. I had become it. I remained beneath the tree for a long time, though no clock marked the hours. Time here didn't pass. It unfolded. I watched the wind ripple through grass that shimmered like morning dew. The stone in my hand pulsed faintly with warmth, a quiet reminder that not all anchors weigh you down. Some hold you steady. Around me, the world waited patiently, asking nothing, offering everything. There was no storm, no village. Only this quiet moment between remembering and becoming. Eventually I stood, not because I needed to leave, but because I was ready to continue. A path had formed ahead, paved not with stone or light, but with choices. Each step I took felt like writing a sentence in a story I had once abandoned. But the words came easily. Now, I was no longer retracing old steps. I was walking forward toward something new. I wasn't erasing Eldermeyer. I was honoring it. It had held my sorrow until I was strong enough to carry it myself. As I reached the edge of the clearing, I turned back one last time. The tree stood tall, the leaves glowing faintly in the golden light. I knew I could return if I needed to. Not because the village would call me, but because I had left the door open. For memory, for peace, for anyone else who might wander through the rain, looking for themselves in the fog. I had become the echo I once followed, and now I would leave echoes for others to find. The air changed as I crossed the final threshold. Distantly, I heard, "Rain again," but not as threat, not as sorrow. It was gentle now, falling far away like a lullaby, the kind you remember from childhood, but only when you're ready. I smiled and closed my eyes for a moment, letting the sound wash through me. When I opened them, the path was gone, the clearing was gone. Only the world remained, real, solid, imperfect, beautiful. And there, standing on a quiet road with nothing but open sky above, I began to walk, not to escape, not to return, but to live. Eldermeyer would always be a part of me. It was never just a village. It was memory. It was the truth behind the silence, the voice beneath the rain. And now that I had listened, I no longer feared what I might find, because I knew the door was no longer locked. It was always waiting. The sky was clear when I woke, yet I could smell the rain, faint, like something half-remembered from a dream. I was no longer in Eldermire, or the space beyond it, but in the quiet comfort of my own home. At least that's what it looked like. The familiar creak of the floorboards, the framed photos, the mug I always left on the kitchen counter. But something in the stillness felt off, like a record starting from the middle of a song. The world had resumed, but it had shifted. As I moved through the house, I noticed small changes, a plant in a new position, a book opened to a page I didn't remember reading, and the sound, just beneath the quiet, of droplets hitting glass, though it wasn't raining. I checked the windows. Dry. The air smelled clean, but faintly electric. I placed a hand on the window pane and felt it. A vibration, soft and rhythmic, like rain falling in another room. Or another world, in the hallway. One of the doors was slightly ajar. It led to the basement, a space I rarely entered. As I stepped closer, the faint tapping grew louder, now clearly the sound of water, dripping steadily onto stone. I flipped. The light switch. Nothing. The bulb had burned out. I grabbed the lantern, the small one from Eldermire. I wasn't sure how it ended up here, but its flame flickered to life the moment I touched it, as though it never left me. With each step down, the air thickened, not with dust or mold, but memory. Every stair creaked in perfect rhythm, as if rehearsed. At the bottom, I found the source of the sound, a small puddle on the concrete floor, forming directly beneath a wooden beam. The beam was dry, the ceiling untouched, but the water continued to fall. Drop, drop, drop. I moved the lantern closer and saw something inside the reflection. A building, a gate, fog drifting across cobblestones. Eldermire. The village was still. There, alive not just in memory, but in echo. The puddle wasn't just water. It was a window, a threshold. And I understood then. The rain never truly leaves. It repeats, cycling through time and thought, waiting for those who once passed through to listen again. Eldermire wasn't bound to one place. It followed the forgotten. It waited in the quiet spaces. And now it was asking me, gently, urgently, "Did you think you were the only one?" I knelt beside the puddle, the lantern flickering softly in my hand. The image within shifted, showing a figure walking through the village, slow, cautious, lost. It wasn't me. Not a version of me, either. This was someone else entirely, a stranger. Their posture unfamiliar, their coat worn differently, their pace hesitant in a way mine never was. I leaned closer. The rain around them fell heavily, obscuring their face, but the village responded to their presence, lanterns lighting one by one, guiding them forward. The realization struck deep. I wasn't the only one who had found Eldermire. The village wasn't mine to own or define. It called to others, too, those with memories buried deep, those who had forgotten something they couldn't name. This person was on their own path, and the rain was their mirror now. I watched as they entered the inn, pushed open a familiar door, and paused, just as I once had. The moment replayed like a memory wearing new skin. I touched the surface of the water. It rippled outward, distorting the scene. When it settled again, I saw dozens of faces flash through the reflection. Some old, some young, all caught mid-expression. A boy with ink-stained fingers, a woman clenching a letter, an elderly man standing alone by the well, each one suspended in a moment of choice, of hesitation. They weren't ghosts. They were echoes, fragments of lives paused by pain, all drawn to the village in the rain. I sat back slowly, the weight of understanding pressing gently on my chest. Eldermire wasn't a place to be escaped or conquered. It was a crossing, a shared dream for those who needed to reconcile with themselves. And for each of us, it appeared differently, offered different doors, whispered different truths. I had walked through my story, but others were just beginning theirs. And now I was no longer just a seeker. I was a witness. The lantern pulsed once, and the image faded. The puddle dried up almost instantly, leaving only a faint ring on the floor. The tapping stopped. The house above was silent again. But I didn't feel alone. Not anymore. Somewhere, someone else had just stepped through their first door. Somewhere, a name was being remembered for the first time in years. The rain was falling again. Not here, but there. And I would be ready when their echoes reached my door. I returned upstairs, the lantern still warm in my hand. The house felt different now. Not eerie or foreign, but reverent, like a place that had been blessed by silence. Each object I passed, a worn coat, an open book, a photograph crooked on the wall, seemed newly significant. I had walked through memory, but now memory walked through me. Eldermire wasn't just in the puddle or the storm. It lingered in the quiet pauses of life, waiting to be heard again. At my desk, I found a blank notebook I didn't remember placing there. Its pages were crisp and untouched. I opened it, and without hesitation, began to write. Not a story, not a dream, just fragments, words, names, moments. A girl at the well, a door left open, rain on wood. I didn't try to order them. I just let them flow. The lantern flickered gently nearby, its light steady and familiar. Each word I wrote felt like planting something, as though memory itself could take root. Outside, clouds had begun to gather again. Not ominous, but expectant. The kind of clouds that carried rain with purpose. I watched them roll across the sky, and I knew another door would open soon, somewhere far from here. Perhaps in a cabin, or on a street drenched in headlights. And someone would hear the first whisper. They'd pause, they'd hesitate, and then they'd follow it. Just as I did. Just as all of us do, when we're finally ready to face what waits inside the storm. I placed the notebook beside the window and left it open, a page half filled with half-formed thoughts. Maybe someone would read them one day. Maybe they already had. I no longer felt the urgency to explain everything. Some things were meant to be experienced. Eldermire had taught me that. Not with answers, but with space, with stillness, with the gentle reminder that healing often begins in the quiet moments between one heartbeat and the next. As evening fell, I lit a single candle and sat by the window. I didn't expect anything. I didn't need anything. I just listened to the wind, to the settling house, to the spaces within myself I had once avoided. And somewhere beyond the hills, I knew the rain had begun again. A new story was unfolding. A new memory was waking. And when the knock came at my door, soft, hesitant, uncertain, I stood to answer with no fear, only welcome. I opened the door, half expecting mist to pour in, or an unfamiliar figure cloaked in fog. But there was no one there, only the scent of rain on warm earth, and the soft echo of footsteps retreating into the distance. Not physical ones, echoes, like a bell rung in another village, another time. I stepped outside and stood under the deepening sky, letting the quiet wrap around me. I wasn't being summoned this time. I was being reminded. The cycle continues, even when you stop walking. In the distance, a single lantern glowed atop a hillside. It pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat. Someone had entered. Someone had remembered, and though I would not follow this time, I knew the path. I knew the fears, the confusion, the weight of silence, and more than anything, I knew the peace that waited at the end when the rain had finished whispering. The village would guide them. The doors would open. The echoes would speak, just as they had for me. Back inside, I sat once more beside the lantern. Its flame no longer felt borrowed or fragile. It was mine now, sustained not by fuel, but by memory, by understanding, by readiness. I placed it on the shelf near the window, beside the open notebook. I didn't need to write anything more. The story had written me, etched itself into the space between each breath, and I was no longer afraid of what came next. Not because I had control, but because I had clarity. The storm never truly ends. It returns in seasons, in thoughts, in old letters and distant songs. But now, when the rain comes back, I no longer brace against it. I step outside. I listen. I remember. Because every drop holds the weight of something worth reclaiming. And somewhere, just beyond the fog, a door waits for someone else to be brave enough to open it. And behind it, Elder Meyer breathes, patient and eternal, offering not escape, but understanding. So if you hear it, the knock at night, the breath beneath the storm, the name you haven't spoken in years, don't be afraid. Open the door, light your lantern, follow the rain. The path is never the same, but the village always knows the way. And when you arrive, I'll be there. Not waiting, not watching, but walking beside you. Because once you've remembered, you're never alone in the rain again. The dream came on a night without rain. A sky full of stars stretched endlessly above me, yet the air smelled of wet stone and moss. I stood in a field I recognized, though it had no name. Soft earth beneath my feet, a whispering wind brushing the tall grass. In the center stood the well, the same broken stones, the same crawling vines. But now, it pulsed faintly with blue light, as though something inside it had awakened. I didn't need to ask why I was there. The well had called. I approached slowly. The world around me hushed. No footsteps, no owls, no distant echoes. Just the low, rhythmic hum rising from the well's center, like a forgotten song resurfacing. When I reached the edge, I looked down. Not into darkness, but into water so clear it seemed made of memory. My own reflection stared back, but not as I was. This version was younger, eyes full of defiance, hands clenched into fists. It was the moment before I ran. The moment I chose forgetting. The water shimmered, and the image shifted. I saw her again. The girl with the pale dress, standing in the rain, watching me walk away. I had turned my back. Not because I didn't care, but because I couldn't face the truth, that she wasn't just a friend. She was a part of me, the part that carried love, fear, and hope in equal measure. And when I left her behind, I didn't just abandon her. I split myself in two. A voice echoed from within the well, soft as breath, but resonating like thunder. You buried the promise here. I closed my eyes and remembered the moment. My hands gripping the edge, my tears mixing with rain, the whispered words, "I'll come back for you." And then silence. For years. Decades. I had sealed the memory beneath stone and storm, convinced that silence was survival. But silence, I now understood, is not the same as healing. I reached into the well, not physically, but with something deeper. A willingness. A surrender. The water rippled as if accepting my offering. My reflection softened, blurred, then cleared again. No longer divided, no longer angry. Just whole. For the first time, the memory didn't ache. It pulsed gently, steadily, as if waiting not to punish, but to return. I opened my eyes and whispered into the well. I remember. And in that instant, the stars above shimmered brighter, as if the sky itself had been holding its breath. The wind shifted, not harsh, but guiding, curling around me like a hand on my shoulder. The grass swayed in unison, and the hum from the well deepened. From its depths, the water began to rise, not violently, but as though it was responding to permission. It didn't overflow. It formed a surface that hovered above the rim like liquid glass. Inside, I saw moments, not images, but feelings. Warmth beside a fire, the tightness of a first goodbye, the weight of a secret kept too long. Each memory moved through me as I watched. Some were mine. Some, I realized, were not. I was seeing through eyes not my own. Others who had stood at this well, who had buried their pain in silence and shadow. Faces flashed through the surface. The boy with ink-stained hands, the woman with the letter, the man at the inn window. They had all whispered promises into this place. They had all returned as I had. The well wasn't just for remembering. It was for reconciliation. And then I saw her again. Not the girl, but the woman she had become. She stood beside the well. In another time, her eyes closed, lips moving in prayer. Her face was older now, but the strength remained. She hadn't waited in stillness. She had lived, changed, carried the memory of me not as a wound, but as a lantern. When her eyes opened in the vision, she looked directly at me, as though she knew I was watching. "You were always worth waiting for," she said. My breath caught in my throat. I had spent so long fearing that my absence had destroyed her. But I saw the truth now. She had become whole without me. And because of that, I could now become whole too. She had not needed saving. She had needed witnessing. And in witnessing her strength, I rediscovered my own. The well shimmered again, the images fading slowly until only my reflection remained. It looked back at me calmly, without judgment. Then, from the far side of the field, I heard a soft bell. Not from a tower, but from within myself. A call, not to leave, but to return. Not to Eldermire as it was, but to life as it could be. I stepped back from the well, feeling lighter than I had in years. The memory had been seen, the promise remembered, and the rain, though absent in the sky, still lived in every breath I took. The healing wasn't sudden, but it had begun. I walked away from the well. The light of dawn began to stretch across the horizon, casting long golden lines through the grass. The world didn't shift or disappear. It remained, quiet, watching, respectful. I turned once more to see the well, expecting it to vanish like so many things in Eldermire had before. But it stayed, unmoving, a gentle sentinel among the fields. Not because it was mine to claim, but because it belonged to anyone brave enough to remember what they had buried. A familiar path opened before me, the earth soft beneath my feet. Along its edges, small lanterns glowed low, barely flickering, as though uncertain of their next role. I carried no map, no destination, only the memory of the promise and the echo of the woman's words still warm in my chest. I wasn't walking away from something. I was walking with it. Grief, love, fear, guilt. They weren't weights now. They were companions. Shadows that no longer scared me when the rain came. Birdsong filled the air, tentative and hopeful. I paused beneath a tall tree and placed my hand on its trunk. The bark was scarred with carvings, names, dates, symbols. Some I recognized from dreams. Others were new, waiting to be understood. The tree vibrated faintly beneath my fingers, as if acknowledging my presence. Perhaps I would carve something here too, not to be remembered by others, but to remind myself that I had returned and I had seen. Further down the path, a small bench appeared near a cluster of white flowers. I sat, letting the light warm my face. In the silence, I could hear everything. The echo of bells, the laughter of distant memory, the steady rhythm of breath. The well had not just shown me the past. It had offered me permission to live, to carry what I'd seen without shame, to let the past be part of me without letting it define me. I looked out across the field, and for the first time, I understood what Eldermeyer truly was. Not a trap, not a curse, but a place of convergence. A village built not from stone, but from stories. And I had become part of that story, not as a ghost, not as a wanderer, but as someone who had stayed long enough to remember, and brave enough to keep going. As I rose from the bench, I saw something in the distance, a small figure walking along the edge of the field, not running, not searching, just walking, slowly, like someone who knew where they were going. I couldn't see their face, but I recognized the posture, the hesitation in each step, the pull of something unresolved. Another traveler, another seeker, just as I had been. The village had called again, and the path had opened. Again. I didn't move to intercept them. This wasn't my journey to interfere with. But I stood still for a moment longer, hand gently resting on the back of the bench. "You're not alone," I whispered, though I knew they wouldn't hear me. The wind carried the words anyway, like a blessing cast over the grass. The rain would return for them too, and when it did, it would know what to show. It always did. Turned from the field, the lantern once again in my hand. Lighter now, as if the flame inside no longer bore the full weight of memory, but flickered with purpose. I walked back toward the place where the path first appeared, unsure if it would still be there. But it didn't matter. The path was no longer something I followed. It was something I created, with each step, each breath, each moment I chose to remember rather than run. The well, the storm, the girl, the house with no reflection. They would all remain part of me, surfacing when the rain fell just right, or when silence grew deep enough to listen. They were not burdens. They were markers. Reminders that there had once been a fracture, and now a thread pulling all the pieces back together. The village would always be there, for those ready to look beneath the surface, for those willing to speak their own name out loud. And as I reached the edge of the dream, the waking world pressing gently on my skin, I looked up at the sky one last time. No clouds, no thunder, only the hush before new rain. I smiled, because now I would never forget where to go when the world grew quiet. I would never fear the whisper in the fog. I would always hear the rain not as warning, but as invitation. Eldermeyer waits, not for the lost, but for the willing. I awoke to the sound of soft rain tapping against the window. Familiar, steady, and no longer ominous. Morning light filtered through the curtains, painting the walls with gentle streaks of gold and gray. The room felt different, though nothing had changed. It was me. I had changed. The weight I once carried in silence now felt like a story I was ready to tell. And outside, beyond the glass, the world didn't wait in judgment. It simply was. I made tea, moving slowly, deliberately, Like someone honoring ritual, the steam curled upward like fog remembered. As I sat at the table, a knock came at the door. Not loud, not urgent, just present. I stood, heart calm, and opened it. There was no one there. Only the porch. Only the rain. But on the doormat sat a folded page, damp but intact. I picked it up carefully. It was from the notebook I had left by the window. A page I hadn't written. But the handwriting was mine. To leave, you must stay. That was all it said. No signature, no explanation. Yet I knew exactly what it meant. I had been so focused on escaping Eldermeyer, escaping memory, escaping the past, that I never saw what it was offering. It wasn't asking me to remain physically. It was asking me to hold space for what mattered, to stay present in the places that hurt, to stay open in the face of grief, to stay human, even when silence was easier. I folded the page and placed it inside the lantern on the shelf. The flame flickered once, acknowledging the offering, then steadied. I didn't need to go back, because Eldermeyer was never behind me. It was within me. Every time I stopped to listen, every time I welcomed the rain, every time I stayed when it would have been easier to run. That was the truth the village had always whispered. Leaving isn't about escape. It's about acceptance. The room brightened as the clouds thinned. The rain continued, but now it sang. Outside, the road stretched into the distance, wet and glistening. Not a trap, not a loop, just a path. One of many. I stood in the doorway, not with hesitation, but with understanding. I had walked the storm. I had remembered the forgotten. And now, with nothing left to chase, and everything left to welcome, I took my first step forward, not away from Eldermeyer, but with it. Each step down the path felt lighter than the last, not because the weight had vanished, but because I no longer feared carrying it. Eldermeyer had taught me that some burdens become part of your rhythm, like breath, like memory, like rain. The village hadn't been a place I got lost in. It had been the place I found myself again and again, through the layers of forgetting. And now I moved through the world with that knowledge folded gently into my bones. The road led me past familiar places, ones that once held echoes I couldn't face. The bench in the park where I avoided old letters, the window I kept shuttered every time it rained, the closet full of boxes I never opened. And yet, now, each of them felt different. Not because they had changed, but because I had stayed long enough to see them. Not with guilt, not with longing, but with presence. The past no longer shouted. It simply stood, quietly, by my side. That evening, I lit the lantern again. Not for guidance, not for safety, but as a sign, for myself and for anyone who might be listening. I placed it by the window, just as I had before, and let it glow. The rain tapped gently outside, and I welcomed its sound. It no longer stirred anxiety. It stirred awareness. The storm didn't mean I was falling apart. It meant something was being revealed. And I had finally learned how to stay long enough to witness it. Before bed, I returned to the notebook. I didn't write a story, just a sentence. I am here. That was enough. Not to prove something, not to preserve something, but to affirm something. That even in the quiet, even when no one else is watching, the act of remaining, of remembering, matters. I closed the book and left it open on the desk. If someone needed it, they'd know where to find it. And if not, that was okay too. Some truths are meant to sit quietly until they're needed. I drifted to sleep to the rhythm of rain, knowing that somewhere, across town, across time, across memory, Someone else might be hearing it for the first time, might be stepping through their own door, might be whispering their own name into the dark. And when they do, when they arrive, they'll find what I did, that to truly leave what haunts you, you must stay long enough to face it. And once you do, you'll never walk alone in the rain again. I dreamed again, not of storms or shadows, but of lanterns. Hundreds of them, floating above still waters, each one carrying a name, a promise, a fragment of someone who had walked through their own rain. They moved in gentle arcs, never colliding, always glowing. I saw my own among them. It pulsed softly, not brighter than the rest, but steady, constant. It wasn't trying to be seen. It was simply there, present, bearing witness, like I had learned to be. In the dream, the girl stood beside me once more. Older, calmer, her dress dry and her feet grounded. "You understand now," she said, not as a question, but as a knowing. "You stayed." I nodded, no explanation needed. We watched the lanterns together, silent. She smiled and whispered, "Then it's time." I didn't ask for what. I didn't need to. The door behind me opened on its own, revealing not a village, not a storm, but a life. One waiting to be lived, no longer feared. I awoke with tears on my face, not from sadness, but from softness, from the gentle ache of having touched something sacred and survived it. The house was still, the rain gone, replaced by the golden hush of morning. Birds sang nearby, not loudly, but in harmony with the silence. The lantern on the shelf had gone out, not extinguished, fulfilled. Its flame had carried me through, and now it rested. I traced its edges with my fingers, then let it be. I opened the window wide and breathed deep. The world beyond smelled of wet leaves and new beginnings. There was no pull to return, no ache of something unfinished. Just peace and clarity. I had not left Eldermeyer behind. I had brought it with me, in how I listened, how I walked, how I waited without fear, in how I held space for others to find their way through the fog. Because some stories don't end. They ripple, they echo, they rain again. Later that day, I passed someone on the street. They paused beneath a gray sky, head tilted toward a sound no one else noticed. Their eyes searched the air like they were listening for something long forgotten. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. I simply nodded once and kept walking, because I knew what they had just heard. The first drop, the first whisper, the call of the storm beginning again. And when their door opened, they too would understand. To leave, you must stay. The days moved gently after that, not in rush or repetition, but with a kind of quiet rhythm that I had once mistaken for stillness. I found meaning in small things. The warmth of tea between my palms, the way light shifted across the floor, the quiet recognition in a stranger's eyes. I no longer waited for storms to pass or signs to appear. The signs were already here. The storm had already done its work, and I had learned to listen, even in the calm. From time to time, I would write in the notebook, just a few lines, sometimes a memory, sometimes a name, sometimes nothing more than, "Today, I stayed." I didn't write to remember anymore. I wrote to remain, as a way of staying present in a world that so often pulled us backward or forward. Eldermeyer had taught me that the moment between breaths, between raindrops, between steps, that was where the real living happened. One evening, a knock echoed through the house. I opened the door and found no one. Only the wind, only the soft scent of fog. But this time, it wasn't for me. It was passing through, on its way to someone else. I stood in the doorway and watched the road stretch out in both directions, uncertain where it ended. And I smiled, because now I understood. Some doors we open for ourselves. Others we leave open for those still finding their way. The rain came again that night, not harsh, not sudden, but full of memory. I lay in bed and listened. Each drop held a name, a story, a step. Somewhere another lantern was being lit. Another voice was whispering into the dark. And somewhere, someone had just stepped over the threshold of their first storm. I whispered, a word to them, not loudly, not in instruction, but in welcome. Stay. Because now I knew that's where it all begins, and so I remain. Not trapped, not lost, but awake, present, whole. The rain may fall again and again, but I will not run. I will light my lantern. I will write in the quiet. I will open the door for myself, for others, for the village that lives in all of us, waiting gently beneath the storm. Because to leave a place like Eldermire, to truly leave it behind, you must first learn how to stay. When the rain begins again, it won't call your name in thunder. It will hum it low in the spaces between memory and breath. You will feel it before you hear it. In the hush of a morning too still, in the weight of a word left unsaid, in the soft knock of something returning, and when you open the door, there may be no one waiting, only mist, only silence, only the echo of your own first step. Do not fear it. The path is not meant to be clear, only true, and lanterns light when hearts remember. Because Eldermire is not a place, it is a promise. A quiet vow carried by the rain from one soul to another, and when it whispers, you'll know what to do. Stay, listen, remember, and walk.